What's up? Welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the Hunger Games prequel film based off the Hunger Games prequel book that came out in 2020. Of course, this is the first Hunger Games film in 8 years. It's been 8 years since the series of 4 films starring Jennifer Lawrence concluded. And I don't know if I was necessarily looking forward to more Hunger Games franchise film adaptations, but I actually thought Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, pretty good, better than I expected. Made some interesting choices that kind of differentiate it from the previous Hunger Games films, and I thought it was done pretty well. And man, it's coming at an interesting time because the Hunger Games feels like such a product of the past with Hollywood. Of course, young adult novel adaptations are really a thing of the past. We just haven't really gotten them in a while. And who knows? Maybe that'll change. We know there's a Percy Jackson series debuting on Disney Plus next month. That was pretty hyped up. A lot of fans for that. I don't know if Hunger Games fans were necessarily clamoring for the prequel book to be adapted. Notably, it's the only prequel book. But nonetheless, Lionsgate's back at it again. Francis Lord's back in the director chair. And this is a prequel in every sense. It's set in the far past of the Hunger Games at the time of the 10th games. And our lead protagonist is none other than Coriolanus Snow, played by Tom Blyth. You might remember Coriolanus Snow as the chief antagonist of the Hunger Games films, played, of course, by Donald Sutherland. So now we are learning about basically the origin of the chief villain of the Hunger Games, and his come up as someone who came from a well-known family but didn't have a lot of money, and his ambition and his drive, and ultimately what changed him and caused him to become a really bad guy by the time we encountered him in Donald Sutherland's version of him. And alongside him, of course, we have Rachel Zegler back in another franchise movie playing Lucy Gray Baird, the tribute selected from District 12. Of course, District 12, Katniss Everdeen, Jennifer Lawrence's district in the future. And also in the film, we have Jason Schwartzman as the kind of media presenter character for the television adaptations of the Hunger Games, similar to the Stanley Tucci character you get in the other movies. You have Viola Davis really enjoying herself as the head of the Pan Am War Department and also the game maker for the Hunger Games. She seems to be really enjoying herself. And Peter Dinklage as the dean of Tom Blyth's Coriolanus' academy school. You have Hunter Schafer as Tigress, young Tigress, Snow's sister, who we would see as an adult in the other films. And yeah, it's a good cast. And I think what's interesting about how way the Hunger Games prequel here is structured is that the Hunger Games have concluded by Act 2 in this movie. There's significantly more movie to come following the games being over. And that's just an interesting choice to me. I think because these are the early games, and these are a time when the games were like lower rated, and they, Viola Davis and Dinklage and them, they decide to up the stakes by having these academy students be selected as mentors for the various tributes. And that's how Snow and Lucy come into contact with each other as they're paired up. And the games, it's a much more like traditional like arena. It's not as opulent and, amusement parky Jurassic Park like the way the Hunger Games were in the other movies, where it was really high tech and advanced and developed. So that simple nature, I think, is a cool switch up, although visually it's not quite as interesting. There's certainly some contrived sequences that result in Lucy surviving and being the winner of the games. But ultimately, the games themselves, while I think they're ultimately compelling, it's kind of a foregone conclusion that Snow and Lucy are going to survive and make it through. And what's to come is actually a bit more interesting, because we see Snow's kind of naked ambition and desire to protect himself, ultimately resulting in him betraying one of his close friends sentencing him to death in order to save his own neck. And Lucy, despite feeling some kind of attachment and kindred spirit with Snow, following his efforts to get her through the games, even if it was an act of self-interest, her suspicions and doubts about Snow begin to increase. And it's a pretty compelling ending as a result. So, yeah, like, I think in terms of like a return to the Hunger Games world, I think like thematically it's actually pretty interesting because it kind of centers your bad guy and doesn't really pull any punches with his turn and his, I think, kind of the ugliness of his character in the end, even though he's initially presented as someone much more likable and kind and trying to do things for his family and that, and watching how that turn goes and seeing Lucy kind of expose him to himself in that regard. I think it's done pretty well. I think Tom Blyth, who I had not really seen in all too much, does a really good job as Coriolanus, and I thought he had really good presence, also great chemistry with Zegler. Going in, you might think that Zegler is more the lead character than she actually is, but very much that is not the case. Snow is the lead. And Zegler, I think she's a great choice for this because the character of Lucy is a singer. And of course, Rachel Zegler, the theater kid that she is, has an amazing voice, as we knew from West Side Story. And she's, I think, really captivating. She has like legitimate star power. She is a really good performer and a great choice, I think, for this role. And I think she makes a huge impression in the movie, and they have really good chemistry and they have some really strong scenes towards the second half of the film. And I really like that. Zegler will next be seeing her in the Disney live action Snow White in a few years from now. But, I thought she was the best part of Shazam 2 earlier this year. Of course, she's great in West Side Story. I think she's a really good actress. She's going to be around a long time. And Tom Blyth, I think, definitely opened a lot of eyes with this performance as well. So, yeah, for someone who was not like a hardcore Hunger Games fans at all, I had not read the prequel book. I thought some of the structural choices, the just core lead performances you get from Zegler and Blyth, I think Viola Davis really showing out, enjoying herself. This franchise has done that before with people like, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Woody Harrelson. They've gotten great actors to kind of let it all out in like smaller parts in this franchise before. But Viola Davis, I think, is really enjoying herself as this kind of demented, almost like Dr. Frankenstein type character. So between all that, I think Schwartzman honestly has some of the best humor and levity in the movie in his kind of small role. Yeah, I think, if anything, I think the PG-13 nature of the movie kind of sanitizes down the battle royale nature of it all, and all the deaths in the games are a lot more simple and straightforward than they end up being in the Jennifer Lawrence films, where the Hunger Games themselves are a much bigger spectacle. But again, that's to be expected. And because this movie is not actually super interested in the games themselves, I think it's okay. So yeah, I thought it was a pretty solid entry. Notably, the box office has been on the softer side of things. I'm curious to see how the movie legs, because this is a film that was produced on a modest budget. I think this is a really smart decision by Lionsgate and all the financing, because it's only a $100 million budget. That's a pretty modest sum for a big blockbuster. And even if this is not going to be a gigantic hit, I'd be curious if the movie is successful enough to justify another entry. Of course, there's no book to adapt. We'll see. But even if it's not, I thought it was a still pretty worthy attempt because of the switch-ups they made. So let me know, how'd you feel about the Hunger Games, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes? What did you think of it? Were you anticipating it? Unlike me, let me know. And for more movie reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time.